There are many ways to find out that your wife is cheating on you. The most popular is an unexpected return home. Then comes the time-tested, a friend suggested it. And of course, the classic one, I accidentally overheard a conversation. What about me? Informed the Washington Post. It may seem strange, but not everyone is married to a woman who sleeps with a senator. Personally, I work in private intelligence. We do the same thing as alphabet agencies, but it pays 10 times better. I started out as the 35th Lima in the 704th Military Intelligence Brigade at Fort Meade. Military intelligence may sound like an oxymoron, but our unit was located on the same base as the NSA. So I was involved in serious technological developments. I was only 23 years old, fresh out of Carnegie Mellon in Class 97 Bravo at Fort Huachuca. Naturally, I was full of myself. I had a badge that said Special Agent, but in reality, I was just a rock nerd from the small town of Madison, Wisconsin. Madison may be the capital of the state, and there may be a large university there. But you don't have to travel far from the city to find yourself knee-deep in cow dung. So the culture of the Capital District was both a rich target and a little overwhelming for a guy from Wisconsin. I was friends with another recruit. His name was Art. We both loved to drink and party, and there was plenty of that in the college ghettos around the University of Maryland. However, we preferred the Fells Point area of Baltimore. First, it made it easier to get to our apartments in Glen Burnie, and nothing beats the timeless party atmosphere of Broadway Square. One evening, I was sitting with Art at the Horse You Came In On Saloon. How can you not check out a place that advertises itself as serving drinks since the 18th century? We were both already a little tipsy, but it was nothing compared to what we had planned for that evening. We were sizing up a table full of girls. There's nothing like a group of visibly drunk girls to attract predators. And the wolves began to gather. As I watched several women drawn in dance, it was clear that everyone was in their happy place. Until one of the obviously drunk guys decided to drag out a girl who clearly didn't want to dance. When the fight started, I nodded to Art as a sign of I can handle it and headed towards the table. In the calmest tone I could muster, I said, "You need to leave, sir." I showed him the badge I was holding in my left hand. I wanted to push him to reason. He looked at him vaguely and mumbled, "But she hit me, officer." I continued in the same policeman tone, "No harm, no complaints, sir. You've all had too much to drink. You and your friends had better find somewhere else to party." He looked at his company. They shrugged and headed towards the door. And he followed them, swaying. Fortunately, none of them noticed that the badge was issued to an Army counterintelligence agent and not to a Baltimore police officer. I had the power to arrest him if he were involved in treason. But at the horse bar, it was just a piece of tin. The woman still looked shocked. Physical confrontation has this effect on people. I sat down in the empty chair next to her and asked, "Are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help?" This was the first time I really looked at her. I understood why the student was so persistent in trying to pull her out. Women like to think that men pay attention to qualities that they can control, like clothes, hair, and makeup. This is true if there is nothing more attractive internally. But let me assure you, ladies, a huge pair of perfectly formed breasts is ace when it comes to getting a guy's attention. And this woman had a pair that, even under a modest white silk blouse, could cause a civil riot in some countries. She was sitting so I couldn't see anything below her breasts. But when I looked away, I saw that she really had a beautiful face. She appeared to be of Italian or Greek descent. She had dark brown hair, dark skin, and beautifully defined features with huge, glowing dark eyes. Those eyes were clouded with a mixture of anger and fear. She tried to calm down. I put a sympathetic hand on her forearm and said, "It's okay. I know it must have been scary, but you're among friends. Nothing will happen now." The fact that she didn't pull her hand away was a sign that she was returning to normal. I said, continuing to reassure her, "What's your name?" "My name is Paul." She looked up and for the first time really focused on me. And I was lost. The sparkling blue splash that jumped from her eyes to mine should have lit up the entire bar. She said in a trembling voice, "Janet, I wasn't sure if the trembling was caused by her recent unpleasant experience or by what had just happened between us. I said, "Can I get you something? There's nothing like a little alcohol to calm your nerves." "What are you drinking?" she said rather casually, "Gin and tonic," and continued to look me in the eyes. Her concentration was alarming. It was as if she was scanning my soul. I said, "I'll be right back," and walked a little too quickly to the bar. I wanted to leave her just to come to my senses. I returned with her gin and tonic and an English IPA for myself. She drank hers in one gulp. Impressive. She looked at me and said, "Thank you for intervening, officer." He scared me, but I don't let anyone treat me like that. And she looked at her incredible breasts. I said, "First of all, I'm not a cop. I have no more authority than you. The badge is a federal agent. I'm in the army at Fort Meade." I really thought she could guess who I was from my cropped appearance. I said, "I just showed it to make him do what he should have done himself. Authority makes the brain work again, even in drunkards." She said, "So you just single-handedly came to my aid. How can I thank you? It was an open invitation if I've ever seen one." I said, "You can have dinner with me tomorrow, unless you're busy, of course. Otherwise, a sincere handshake and a kiss on the cheek will do." She kissed me on the cheek and said, "See you tomorrow at 6 p.m. I need to get back to my girlfriend's, but here's my address." And she wrote something on the back of the business card. I turned it over, and it said, "Janet A. Wilson, J.D." I thought, damn, lawyer. However, I pressed her call at exactly 18 the next evening. She lived in a classic single-girl condominium in Bethesda. All I heard was a lot of barking and the sound of someone pushing the dog away from the door. Then she opened it, and all my doubts about her profession evaporated like the morning dew. There was too much alcohol and general chaos last night for me to get a good look at it. Now the goddess Venus herself stood in front of me in tight jeans and a loose sweater. She had incredible curves, long legs, wide hips, slim waist. She was still struggling with what looked like a hairless rat, but I assumed it was a chihuahua. Finally, she bent down and picked it up. She was so engrossed in her animal that she didn't notice the look of confusion on my face. It is a constant process of rebalancing in a solo environment where everyone is looking for their place in the social hierarchy. And I wasn't sure I was in her league. But she looked at me so hotly that I was sure my socks were about to catch fire, and said, "Sorry about that, Chiquita thinks she has to protect me from everyone." The rat showed me its teeth and let out a low warning growl. I said, "No problem. I love dogs." What I didn't add was that my dog is a 100-pound sharp Pipette Lab mix named Buster. She threw her animal back into the room and closed the door. She then walked out into the hallway and took my arm in that way that women used to show that you are with them. She said, "Where are we going?" I replied, "I was thinking we could try Blue Duck. I want to get to know you better, and their outdoor deck is a great, quiet place to do that." It was a beautiful clear autumn evening in Washington. She looked worried, said, "I heard about this place and really wanted to try it. Rumors say it's very romantic. You don't have anything planned, right?" she said with a flirtatious smile. I joked back, "Only if you have plans." I drove a silver Mercedes SLK. Like all good German guys, I love high-quality technology, and no one does it better than my compatriots. Okay, maybe my ancestors settled in Wisconsin in the late 1800s, but as far as the family is concerned, once a German is always a German. She was pleased with it, I hope. She said, "I thought you all were big macho guys driving muscle cars." I replied, "I don't like to advertise it," and turned on the smoothly running transmission. We talked all the way to the restaurant, and then we talked even more. Janet served as an assistant on the Senate Armed Services Committee. She grew up in a wealthy family in Chicago and received a classical education on the Gold Coast at Northwestern University and the University of Chicago Law School. She was 24 years old, like me, and just beginning to settle into the culture of Capitol Hill. The more we talked, the closer we became. She was stunning, but she was much more than just beautiful. She was smart, straightforward, and very funny. I took her home that night and left her at the door. She stood on her tiptoes and gave me a kiss. She said, "I've never felt this way after a first date. I'm not going to sleep with you tonight because I'm not that kind of girl, but if you come back for a second date, I'll rock your world." We went to Blues Alley the next night, and she wasn't kidding. We listened to music and had a couple of drinks. Every time she stood up, every guy in the room looked at her. Hell, I was looking at her too, even though I was with her. Men who date women with large breasts know what I'm talking about. It is not clear why men are so attracted to developed mammary glands, but this is undoubtedly the case. And if your woman has such a pair, you just need to get used to the fact that all the men in the room will stare at her. Anyway, we got back to her house, and she said, "Why don't you come over for a late-night cocktail?" So I came in. I wasn't that stupid. We made love. She looked at me as if she thought she had done something wrong. I asked, "What?" She replied, "Don't you think now that I'm some kind of woman of easy virtue? I've never lost control like that in my life." I laughed and said, "Every man wants his woman to be a lady in the living room and a mistress in the bedroom. How could I not love you?" Oh my God, after 2 dates, I did the unforgivable. I used the forbidden word love. I knew I could just put my pants on and leave before she called the sheriff to evict me. Instead, she grabbed me by the neck with both hands, looked into my eyes, and said with touching sincerity, "I love you too." And that's how it all began. We dated for 6 months, which was enough time for us to completely get used to each other. I met her parents when they came to the wedding. I could tell that the dress uniforms and medals were responsible for much of their admiration. That's what the form is for. I wasn't going to educate them about fruit salad. Most of these awards are the same crap as everyone else. The army likes their men to look like heroes when they're dressed for parade. We settled into a small house in Greenbelt. She could take the Green Line to Elk Infant and Capitol South, and I could ride the Baltimore-Washington Park to FT. It was an idyllic period in our lives. Even the dogs slept together, although I was worried that the 100-pound Buster would accidentally crush the 5-pound Chiquita in his sleep. Janet was rising through the ranks of congressional staff, and I was ending my service with the rank of captain. After I left, I was hired by a private firm in Roslyn. I did the same analytical tasks, but the salary was with 6 zeros, which was a tribute to the amount of money from the war on terror that was swirling around Washington. We maxed out our mortgage and bought a condo on the C&O Intracoastal Waterway in Georgetown. Vienna would have been much cheaper, but we both liked the atmosphere of Georgetown, and we did everything that 34-year-olds do there. Our love life continued to be perfect, and we had a warm, relaxed relationship the entire time we were together. We laughed a lot and spent wonderful, quiet Sundays together, each with his own book and Chopin playing through the home speakers. All in all, it was everything one could expect and want from a marriage. One of the benefits of working in commercial intelligence was that I had a 9-to-5 schedule, as opposed to active duty military service. I did most of my analytics work on a team with young and enthusiastic GWU and Georgetown graduates. These were routine threat assessment tasks I performed for Army counterintelligence, but this was on an attack surface that was more business-oriented than military-oriented. That's why I dressed for work in preppy style and not in BDU and beret. My men were only 8 to 10 years younger than me, but between my time in service and the fact that I was their superior, they tended to treat me like Methuselah. I liked the respect, but I missed the camaraderie I had with my team at the fort. Janet dressed, as always, businesslike. A smart and capable woman like Janet wants to be appreciated for her deeds, not for her appearance, and those breasts and ass she carried around with her were distracting unless she hid them with low heels, a classic gray pencil skirt, and a silk blouse. Her hours were a little more erratic than mine, since she was involved with the committee. There were long periods when she spent her free time working on projects for constituents and came home long before me. Then there were periods of intense work, especially during budget time, when she could be on the Hill all day and late into the night. Janet was promoted to Senior Policy Advisor in December last year. It was a nice salary increase, but the downside was that she had to spend late nights on the Hill and at committee events. The promotion was unexpected, as one usually has to go through a long apprenticeship before landing one of the real advisory roles. But she was a very smart woman, and frankly, I thought she was much more capable than the guy she was advising. So it was clearly deserved, at least, that's what I thought. She was the chief policy advisor to the committee chairman. The chairman himself was from one of those Bible Belt states where, based on who they kept sending to Congress, you began to wonder if any of his constituents had finished the 9th grade before marrying their sister. I met him several times. He looked like the spitting image senator from Hollywood films with impressive height, piercing eyes, and a determined jaw. He was between 50 and 60 years old, handsome, and had the appearance of a leader. But in reality, it was as slippery as slime on a doorknob. He never served, and his thick wavy hair was a wig. However, he mastered the role of Foghorn J. Leghorn to perfection. He told the flock what they wanted to hear, no matter how illogical there was a message. It was a delightfully cynical approach to political reality. But the people voting for him were still like cattle. My own opinion of him was that he was a complete narcissist with the personal integrity of a used car salesman. In his opinion, everything was for sale. But he served 3 terms in the Senate, and the seniority system gave him the opportunity to prove so far that power corrupts. His blonde wife was as elegant and sophisticated as her husband was a typical hillbilly. She obviously came from more money and more influence in their state, which is what put her husband in the Senate in the first place. She looked like 2 peas in a pod, like the aging Grace Kelly, blonde, slender, and majestic. While his 4 children were older, from 19 to 25 years old, all of them studied in schools of another state, which spoke about the senator's opinion about the educational system of his state. Janet said that this truly dubious example of American democracy was actually a down-to-earth, good guy in private life. Personally, I didn't trust that my taxes were in good hands, and I didn't like the smirk he gave me when we first met. I was aware that he was significantly higher than me in the hierarchy, but it was family money that put him there, not his innate intelligence and hard work. As a senior staff member, Janet was expected to attend committee-related events. I would go with her if necessary, especially if it was a social event. But when she worked, she walked alone. Obviously, she always had to dress for the occasion. I was sitting in our office when she appeared at the door to say goodbye. She was going to the Kennedy Center for some event where someone was being honored. They're always giving each other awards, so it's hard to keep track of everything. She wore a simple deep blue Versace dress. The effect was stunning. The dress showed off enough of her huge breasts on top and her stunning legs below to be sexy without seeming too provocative. With her perfectly made-up face and body underneath the dress, I knew she would have all the old men in the palm of her hand. She was clearly thoughtful. I asked, "What happened?" She replied, "Oh, nothing." Then she said with emotion in her voice, "Have you ever thought about just leaving everything and going to live on the beach? Where did this come from?" She's clearly been under stress these past few months, but with the new fiscal year and all the battles over appropriations, September was a tough time on the Hill. I thought to myself, perhaps she's just tired of all these hidden shenanigans. I said, "No, I didn't really think so. But my job is far from that stressful like yours. We should discuss this. Maybe it's time to think about starting to sell your services on Key Street." She looked at me gloomily and said, "Maybe so. But giving up power is difficult. It is intoxicating." Then she suddenly perked up and said, "Let's go down to the Point Lookout next weekend. Just you and me and nature." And she gave me one of her patented hot looks. I knew what it meant. We sailed on the sea in C-40, and we spent some of our most romantic weekends anchored in Piscataway Creek near Fort Washington. We enjoyed the silence of nature and made the boat rock from time to time. We would then end the weekend with a nice dinner in National Harbor or Old Town Alexandria. I said, "Of course, honey. We need to get away from all this madness and get back to just you and me like the old days. Before you became a power broker on Capitol Hill." I stood up and walked over to kiss her goodbye. She looked sad, but she looked at me with absolute devotion. She turned and walked towards the door in her 4-inch stilettos, leaving a trail of her special perfume. This smell evokes incredible desire in the male half of humanity. She looked around and said happily, "I'll probably spend the night at the Watergate. There's a party there, and I don't want to go home after drinking." This was not unusual. This had been her usual routine ever since she took up the high position. So I joked, "I'll be safe and sound here and call girls for me tonight. I promise." She looked at me as if she wasn't sure I was joking. So I gave her a big smile and said, "Just kidding." She smiled back and closed the door. She actually didn't return until late on Sunday evening. In the morning, she called and said that she had a lot of work to do in the Russell building and that she would be busy all day with paperwork. With nothing better to do. I spent the day at the marina doing all the maintenance that needs to be done to keep a boat in shape. As the old saying goes, if you want to understand sailing, stand in a cold shower and tear up $50 bills. However, it was a completely peaceful and enjoyable day. I took a nap, ate on the boat and returned home. Janet arrived less than half an hour after me. She immediately went upstairs to dump her things and change clothes. She took a small bag with her when she left. I was waiting for her with a fresh gin and tonic when she reappeared. She was wearing tight yoga pants and an oversized, loose University of Chicago sweatshirt. Her hair was pulled back and she looked tired. She sat down next to me on the large corner sofa and nestled under my arm. She said, "I'm really tired of all this stress. Once the enabling legislation for this year is passed, I'll take some time off and we can get things back on track. I know I've been too busy lately and I apologize for that. I was selfish. I promise it will change." Then she kissed me. I suggested that we make love to her. But she said, "Not today, honey. I'm too tired for it to be enjoyable. But get ready for tomorrow. I won't go to the office. I'll be relaxing here all day, so I'll be rested and ready to kick your ass." With that, she finished her drink and headed upstairs. I sat for some time, thinking about her words. She's been really busy lately and has been spending more time away from home than usual. This seemed to coincide with her promotion, and I wondered if she was considering my suggestion that it was time to move into the lobbying industry. There's really a lot of money there. She sounded sincere in her desire to restore our relationship. There was no doubt about it. So perhaps she decided it was time for another big step. It was a child. We put it off until we got our careers established. But at 34, almost 35, she wasn't getting any younger. She was still sleeping when I left for work the next day. She looked both innocent and incredibly sexy, with her tousled hair framing her angelic face. I grabbed my usual breakfast from Starbucks next to Rosslyn Tube Station. This is where the blue shuttle from Georgetown stops. Then I headed to work, feeling more alert than I had in a long time. It was a beautiful autumn day, and the entire city of Washington, D.C., sparkled outside my 6th-floor office window. I felt especially uplifted. It seemed as if Janet and I might be entering a new phase in the twisting turns of our lives. There was a knock on the door, and Corey, my assistant and essentially my right-hand woman for the past 3 years, poked her head into the room. Corey graduated from Georgetown and had been my indispensable assistant for 3 years. I mentored her the first year, but the last 2 years she showed that she could surpass me in analytics. She was smart, funny, and always full of life. Her technical skills were second to none. She and Janet were similar in many ways, smart, beautiful, energetic, and strong. But while Janet had a curvaceous body, Corey was elf-like if you imagine elves actually have big breasts. Corey had short blonde hair that seemed to be natural and the largest green eyes seen outside of the cat family. She was only 1 meter and 50 centimeters tall, so she looked like Tinker Bell without the wings and the provocative costume. She had a strong, round, flexible body, and she could weigh only 50 kilograms with a wet head. The irony was that somewhere in the process of creating Corey, one of her celestial designers decided it would be funny to attach large breasts to her small frame. I'm guessing this was done to see if she could stand up straight without falling on her face. The result of this experiment was that my workmate also had a wonderful pair of breasts. I say this with the greatest respect, because the only sexual feelings I had for Corey were in theory. I admitted that she was a beauty, but this recognition did not go beyond a general idea of how attractive she was. She seemed to have an active sex life. I knew this because she told me about her adventures. She did this without going into detail, and this was the way close work friends usually communicate. Of course, such conversations usually only occur between residents of a men's club. Of course, Corey looked more like a guy than a girl. She played 4 years of field hockey for Georgetown and grew up with 3 brothers. Any woman who could burp the alphabet was okay for us guys. She was her usual dazzlingly energetic self, although I knew she had spent the weekend with some guy in Manhattan. She said cheerfully, "There's someone here who wants to talk to you. He doesn't say who he is. Do you want me to let him in, or should I throw him off the roof?" I smiled at her and replied, "Let this mysterious stranger come in, but be ready to intervene if I need your help. She is 1.50 meters, and I am closer to 190 centimeters and weigh about 100 kilograms. She got the joke. My visitor was a small man with a rat's face and a hoodie. I was about to say, "I'm not interested in buying illegal substances," when he pulled out his ID and said, "I'm Arnie Gold from the Washington Post, and I need a minute of your time." It was interesting. I leaned back in my chair, trying not to look too curious, and said, "How can I help Arnie?" He said, "You know," and showed me a photo of Senator Cornpone on his phone. I was puzzled, said, "Yes, of course. My wife, Janet Schmidt, is one of his senior staff, and I have met with him several times." He said, "I wouldn't like to ask you that question." He clearly really wanted to ask me that question. "But we are investigating a senator, and your wife has been mentioned several times in the investigation." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Let me ask this straight. To your knowledge, your wife is having an affair with a senator." I stood up slowly, leaned forward with his hands spread wide on the table. Veins stood out on my neck. I must have looked like I was about to jump over the table and attack him. My posture was aggressive, but my voice was relatively calm. I said, "Do you think you have the right to come in here and ask me such a question?" He squirmed in his chair, but with the same calmness in his voice, he said, "I have observed them in various situations, and given their behavior, and some of the things that the senator's staff have told me, I believe that there is a sexual relationship between them." It hit me like a bolt from the blue. Is Janet unfaithful? The beautiful, smart, and collected woman who was my soul is cheating on me. I never allowed such a thought. We have always had a warm and comfortable relationship. There was never a time when she acted distant or unhappy with me. She never refused me anything. Plus, the sex was always great. I expected to die in her arms. However, this rodent from the Post is telling me the exact opposite story. I said, "How am I supposed to know what she's doing with that slimy piece of shit?" She's with him because she works for him. And honestly, why is it any of your business? What makes you think you can just walk in here and ruin my life? He looked a little offended and said, "The senator is one of the leading conservative voices for family values, and the public has a right to know whether he is, in fact, a hypocrite. This is a story that needs to be told, and if it's true, it will make a lot of headlines. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of it." So that's who he is. This little ferret saw himself as the embodiment of the Woodward and Bernstein of the new era. I was sure he had already made room on his mantelpiece for his Pulitzer. I said coldly, "I will not insult your accusation with any comment. My wife is a loving and faithful woman who would never betray my trust. The senator may be morally bankrupt, but my wife is not, and I do not appreciate your insinuations. Please, go away." He looked like he was about to say something else, but instead he stood up and extended his hand. I shook it, and he said, "Here's my business card, in case you change your mind." I walked him to my office door. He opened it and let him out. Then I closed the door, returned to my desk, and sat down. Waves of anxiety washed over me. Suddenly the day didn't seem so bright anymore. Then a blonde head of hair and a pair of mischievous eyes peeked into the door. She said in her usual playful tone, "What did that creepy guy want?" I thought for a minute. My heart told me that I needed a friend, and my mind was telling me that I needed someone's help and advice. I couldn't handle this alone and stay sane. So I crossed my fingers and said to myself, "It's all or nothing." I looked at her and said, with a little too much seriousness, "He's from the Washington Post." Carrie looked at me with that expression her generation often wears when you mention that old lady from 15th Street. Her internet-connected generation thinks the Post has news carved into stone tablets. I said, he wanted to tell me something personal, and I think I need to talk to someone. She jumped up on the chair in front of me, looking as interested as a Jack Russell Terrier waiting for someone to throw a ball. Her beautiful round face with huge green eyes expressed concern. She asked, "What did he say?" I started with a preface. "Carrie, we've been working together for almost 4 years. During that time, I've come to consider you one of my best friends. I don't have many friends or even people I trust, but you're one of them. So I will rely on you to keep this a secret forever. If you can't promise me that, then we need to forget I even brought it up." Her bright green eyes clouded over with resentment, and she began to cry. "Women," she said, "you can always trust me. You were my mentor, my friend, and the only man I could rely on in my life. I will never betray your trust." I thought, yes, really? Where have I heard this before? But what I really said was, this guy was a reporter. He was investigating the senator that Janet works for, and from his investigation, he concluded that she was involved in an affair with him. He wanted me to confirm this, which of course I didn't. But if something really happens between them, I will be the center of attention on all the news channels around the clock. I think you understand how humiliating it would be for me personally and also completely destroy our marriage. I just can't accept that kind of infidelity, and if Janet is really involved in something like that, she's not the woman I married. Carrie looked shocked. Something else also appeared in her eyes, but I could not understand what it was. Her usually joyful face changed. It went from a beautiful fresh light that made her look like she was 16 years old to a much more focused and grounded person. At that moment I realized why she was such an effective analyst. Her mind was like a steel trap. She said with concern in her voice, "How can I help?" I replied, "I'll have to figure out what's going on and I'll need your usual technical help getting everything set up." And I added with a grimace, "I might need a shoulder to cry on, depending on what I find out. Also, I'll need a partner in crime if things turn out to be as bad as Gold says, because I'm not the kind of person who can live in peace until he closes all his accounts." She looked at me with an unwavering gleam in her eyes and said with conviction, "You can count on me, boss." Carrie is 10 years younger than me and she always seemed more like a little sister to me than a real colleague, but I felt the intensity in that graceful body combined with her excellent mind. And I realized for the first time that she was not at all naive. I knew she treated men like snacks. I always thought it was because she leads the carefree life of a single girl and sometimes I worried about her. Now I realized that the woman sitting in front of me was not afraid of any man or any situation because she was always in power. She was a very tough girl. I arrived home at the usual time. Janet was my one true love and my best friend and companion throughout my adult life. She contributed as much to who I am as my parents did, so I didn't have to pretend to feel comfortable camaraderie. She ran into town and bought empanadas and deep-fried food from a van with tapazami and had dinner laid out on our back patio when I walked in. She tied her brown hair into a ponytail and she was wearing jeans and a Northwestern University football team t-shirt. The t-shirt was hanging behind him with a round delicious ass. She looked like the hottest sorority girl. She handed me the beer and said cheerfully, "So how's the war on terror going?" I replied, "Same old story. The villains have to get up very early to do something against me. How are things on the Hill?" I thought I saw a shadow pass across her face. She said with an unusual amount of cynicism in her voice, "Oh, just great." What was it all about? We ate and talked as usual. It was such an ordinary evening that the problem I was struggling with temporarily moved to the back of my mind. Finally, she said with lust in her voice, "Didn't you promise to take care of me?" Oh, yes, right, certainly. I was tormented by the thought that this might be my last opportunity to make love to her. But for now, she was innocent until proven guilty and she was still the sexiest woman I've ever known. We lay on the floor in the afterglow. Finally, she opened one eye and said, "What did you just do to me? Are you trying to make me your love slave?" I had the thought that slavery was the least I would do to her if I found her in the senator's bed. But instead I said, this happens when two people are as aligned as we are. We love each other and this is the result. She looked at me with piercing sincerity and said, I know I love you with all my heart. We got ready and started our new morning routine. She took a shower and at that time I installed spyware on her phone and both laptops, personal and work. Thank God she brought home a worker to work remotely, otherwise the task would have been much more difficult. A remote access virus gives complete control over the computer on which it is installed. I was particularly interested in camera and audio access. It allowed me to see her life from the other side of the mirror. Typically, social engineering is used to install such a virus. But since I had physical access to both of Janet's computers, it took me less than 10 minutes. I spent most of my time cracking her passwords. Her devices were protected with passwords. But my password cracking program, John Ripper, easily coped with this task due to their simplicity. I hid both viruses in unobtrusive processes so that they would load the 4 antivirus programs. Janet was drying her hair in the bathroom while I completed my reading of her life. Was it mean to the love of my life? Absolutely. Would I do it again? Certainly. I needed answers before it blew my mind. The next day, I was finishing up setting up a malware connection on her laptops in her office. I wanted her devices nearby to make sure everything was okay. Penetrating systems is no longer considered a great technological achievement. It was different before. But now this is what 16-year-old boys do to keep an eye on their girls. Tools, knowledge, and step-by-step instructions are easy to find on the internet. I installed a data interception app on her phone. In essence, it was a telephone wiretapping. And I listened to her every call. I connected the bug to a recorder in the cloud. I also connected the GPS function to the tracking app, which showed Janet's movement history. The viruses on her 2 computers were backdoors. They gave me complete control over the laptop's functions when I accessed them from my device. They were also configured to record and remotely download everything that happened in the field of view of the camera and the hearing of the microphones. This satisfied me, and I decided that what will be will be. So I went to work. It was another beautiful day in our area, but the mood was far from cheerful. I knew I loved Janet with all my heart. And I believed that she felt the same way about me. There was nothing in her behavior that pointed to another man in her life. And there were no mysterious disturbances in the force and the rhythms of our marriage. Janet knew how to treat people. The revered senator was her main goal, since he was the one who could do a lot for her. So maybe that was what Gold noticed. But one way or another, I knew that by the end of the week, I would have the answers. Carrie was sunny as always. She was wearing a tight black t-shirt that stretched over her disproportionately large breasts. And she wore her usual studded leather jeans with 4-inch heels. We had a very relaxed dress code, and Carrie was never shy about showing off her curvaceous body or her fiery sexuality. I said, I think I'll let the rats run around for a couple of days, and then on Saturday, we'll look at what we've got. She replied, I connected 3 bugs to an LTE connection on the dark server you asked me to set up. There's a terabyte of memory there before we have to change anything. That should be enough for a week of audio and video. How are you feeling? I replied, there is no reason to worry. There is no evidence of her cheating, and I still believe in her. Carrie looked at me with that look she reserves for the hopelessly naive and said, something will happen. I'm a woman, and I know how it works. We are faithful because we choose it. You can't chain us to the wall, so the girl will do what she wants. Our choice may be due to our moral or religious beliefs or a simple sense of personal honor, but it is our decision and only ours. Men will sleep with anyone, but for a woman, cheating is a much more conscious decision. The motive may be nothing more than irritation or boredom, but we always do it for a reason. That's why women tend to sleep with bosses or with richer people or with more physically dominant men. It gives them something they don't already have. Of course, there are hopeless women of easy virtue, but most of us do not cheat on purpose, and there would be less betrayal if the male world were not so stubbornly aggressive. There are men who are just as decent and honest as you, but there are also a lot of guys who have no conscience or empathy at all. They are attracted by the hunt, the feeling of euphoria from the next conquest. And for a woman, you are just a trophy to be won. When one of these guys targets you, he will do anything to win. They show you who they want to appear to be, but in reality, they are never who they say they are, and they don't treat you like a human being with feelings that can be hurt and dignity that can be violated. They are only interested in one thing: to put your victory in their personal standings. The problem with women is that we have unrealistic self-image. We are taught to always be perfect. So when we fail, no matter the reason, we tend to just accept the situation. It's like we have to keep sleeping with Prince Charming, even though he turns out to be a real toad, because we can never turn back time. This is our atonement for the crime of the trait. Then she looked at me awkwardly and said, "You know, I've been in this situation myself a couple of times, and I bet your wife has found herself in the exact same situation." At the level of my base instinct, I knew Thackeray writes, but I was still in denial. So I said, "We'll see. Maybe I believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, but I'm just not ready to accept that my marriage is over, and rest assured, it's finished if what Carrie said is true." The next few days were difficult. Much of the difficulty stemmed from the fact that I was probably writing the end of my own story. Another part of the problem was that Janet became particularly affectionate, which made me feel extremely mean. I got the impression that she had come to some kind of epiphany. She's never been unkind or disrespectful, but she's been working hard for the last 4 or 5 months. Now it seemed like she was trying to spend more time with me. I would never have noticed this change in her behavior if Mr. Gold had not come to me. But looking back, her actions looked very remorseful. I tried to live as usual. I went to work and returned home, as always. We spent time together, joked as always, and that week we made love again. I had no idea what to do. I wanted to take a look at the data before deciding on next steps. But even the most superficial viewing of the video would take several hours. So I decided to put off Armageddon until Saturday morning. On Saturday, I got up much earlier than Janet and left her a note saying there was an emergency at work. When I arrived at work with my usual Starbucks venti and a bagel, there were a lot of people in the office. Carrie was not among them. She returned to Manhattan. She told me she was going to show up on Monday morning. She seemed to consider this guy more serious than the usual dating partners. I waved to a few colleagues as I walked into my private office, and activated the electronic lock. I do sensitive work, so my office walls are protected with a simplified version of Tempest shielding, and my workstation is very secure. Carrie connected the old.mil site on the dark web as our forwarding point to the cloud. So if anyone found my rats, they would lead to a place that hasn't been used since President Reagan was president. I looked at what we had collected over the past 4 days and found that we were almost at our storage limit. There were over 100 calls and emails and hours of rat footage on my work laptop. There was less video from her personal laptop as she seemed to only use it after work. I quickly watched the video. By 10:30 a.m., I already knew the whole terrible truth. She definitely cheated on me. It was terrible. They seemed to limit their dates to her office, which was a much less public place than his. Yesterday, I finally got a great video of both of them, exactly what I needed. It was filmed on her personal laptop. She was working on it at a table next to her desk when the call came, and it was directed to the entire room. She walked over to her desk to pick up the phone. Her work laptop recorded her sitting in an office chair and gave her a landline phone. From the conversation, I realized that the congressman was calling from his office to see if she was available. The timestamp was last night at 8:13 a.m. She was sitting at her desk doing something, and at 8:37 a.m., the scumbag senator showed up at her door. He entered and locked the door. He said, "Everyone has gone home. You let them go, right?" She sat directly in front of the laptop and answered with some sadness. "I sent them all home, just like you asked." He said, "Great. Then let's get started." Romantic guy, isn't he? After sex, he left. Then she started crying. I have never heard such heart-wrenching sobs from a person in my life. Last night, she came home while I was already asleep. But I went to bed early. I was glad it turned out that way. I turned off the video and just sat there, staring into space. My thoughts were blank and I felt nauseous. The pain was almost unbearable. The pain continued to come in wave after wave. I knew with absolute certainty that emptiness had become my new reality. I kept telling myself that I was strong enough to handle this. But my thoughts were a black void. The impact of it just overwhelmed me. And I lowered my head to the table and cried for the first time in 30 years. It was fucking humiliating. But thanks to the shielding, no one saw or heard me. After a couple of minutes, my self-esteem took over. I needed to pull myself together, calm down and take some action. I stopped crying, went to the private bathroom and poured water on my face. I wiped my face, looked into my red eyes and said, "You're alone now, soldier. So pull yourself together and stop being such a weakling." After I witnessed what happened, I knew I couldn't stay married to Janet. But this thought blew a hole in my previously complacent outlook on life. Everyone should have at least some confidence. Mine was built around my marriage and hers. It may have been stupid to put all my eggs in one basket, but I chose this path. Now I realize how mortal I truly am. And it was a terrible performance. Nothing was certain for me now except death and the burning hatred I had for Senator Jubal Early Simpson. I knew it was time to close that door and move on to the next phase of my life without Janet. The vista I was walking into was as desolate and lifeless as a desert. But I felt that I could retain at least some part of my sanity if I controlled my hatred. I was still in a state of shock. All I could think about was getting alone and thinking. As I walked down to the car, I had a completely inappropriate thought. Thank God I decided to drive instead of taking the blue bus. I couldn't face her now. I didn't want anyone to find me, so I drove the Range Rover to Fort McNair. I have access to this base as a reserve officer. I parked the Rover in the back parking lot of the NDU on V Street. I locked it and walked the 200 yards to the James Creek Marina. I cast off and sailed down a short section of Otherness and out into the Potomac. I kept the boat running on the diesel engine the entire way down the river to Belmont Bay. As soon as the sun set, I dropped the anchor's bow and stern. Ride down Potomac was partly therapeutic. It was another beautiful fall day and I tried to focus on the things I still had. I had a job that I loved and I had some good friends, especially Carrie. If I ever needed her support, it's now. But I had too much pride to interrupt her weekend. I had just turned 35 and was in decent shape. I will find another woman and rebuild my life, no matter how scary it may sound. But first I had a debt to settle. The thought of the scorched earth I was about to bring into Senator Simpson's life almost restored my wholeness. My phone started ringing around 3:30 p.m. I formed a plan and absolutely did not want to talk. She kept calling after that, so I turned off the call. I had a lot of alcohol on the boat, but I'm not the type of person who drinks to escape problems. So I sat in the cockpit in the dark, drinking Yuengling and listening to the birds and insects in Occoquan Bay. Then the phone lit up again. I was about to turn it off, but I saw that it was Carrie calling, not Janet. I picked up the phone and said, "Hey, baby." Voicery sounded angry. "Where the hell are you? Have I been looking for you everywhere?" I answered, trying to sound cheerful. "Hello to you, too. How's New York?" Carrie said, "Fuck New York." As soon as Janet called me, I realized that the ball had risen here and I returned 3 hours ago. I went to every place I could think of looking for you. You need a friend. A wave of gratitude washed over me. Of course, I need someone. And Carrie was my best friend. Now that my ex-best friend has disqualified himself. I said, "Are you going to tell Janet where I am?" She replied, "Of course not. Unless you want it." I thought for a second. I formed a plan all the way down the river and it depended on not having any of the adulterers realize that I knew. But I couldn't confront Janet without giving away my position. So I said, "You can call Janet and tell her that you just found out that I went on some top secret mission overseas and I can't talk right now. Make something up. Make it believable. Tell her I'll try to get in touch when I can and that I love her." This should calm her down. Carrie said with disbelief in her voice, I'm guessing from the way you're acting that you found out she cheated with that bastard and you still love her. I said, oh, I love her. That's for sure. I just don't ever want to be in the same room with her again. Now I'm trying to mend the remains of my broken heart. But many pieces are missing. Carrie said, where the hell are you? I come to you. I replied, I'm on a boat. I'm staying at Belmont Bay near Woodbridge, but don't come. She said, I'll be there in an hour, and ended the call before I could add anything. Exactly an hour later, she called me from the pier of the Belmont Marina. She stood under the halogen lights of the dock, wearing her usual skinny jeans, although she was wearing boat shoes instead of heels. She was wearing a chambray work shirt that hung below her bubble butt and was carrying a small suitcase. She climbed aboard and disappeared down the gangway. I opened a couple of coldy winglings. She came out and came to me and kissed my forehead. She stepped back and held me at arm's length with her huge, bright emerald eyes, studying my face intently. The fact that she was standing and I was sitting and she was looking straight into my eyes only emphasized how small she was. She said with concern, I know it hurts. Do you want to talk about it? I replied, not really, not right now. I'm still trying to process what I saw and I will never be able to get over this. It hurts too much and I don't want to lose control in front of you. But what I really want to talk about is revenge. Can you have a beer with me and you can help me make a plan to destroy them both? Are you ready for this? She assumed a military pose in all her magnificent glory and gave me a British salute where she got it from, I don't know, and said, yes, Captain. So we spent most of the night drinking beer and plotting revenge. Her presence was like a pharmacy full of antidepressants. She was the embodiment of what distinguishes women from men: caring, soothing support, ideal tenderness. She also had a truly twisted and devious mind. It was Carrie who remembered that my wife's work laptop might still be connected to their office network. Janet never turned anything off. And if she was still online, we could access everything that was on the senator's server through a virus. Given the state in which Janet left last night, good security probably wasn't a priority. I went into the cabin, activated the virus, and as expected, the respected senator's life was an open book. So I downloaded all his personal files onto a portable hard drive. There was so much information in the download that it took the best part of 2 hours on an LTE connection. But I still couldn't sleep. This information will give me a lot to think about tomorrow. Once the download was complete, I erased the viruses. I didn't want my NSA colleagues to discover how classified information we'd collected had been leaked. I told Carrie to come out on deck so she would have an alibi. She looked at me as if I had gone crazy and said with some heat, where you go, I go. Looks like she was inspired by Braveheart. It was now about 3 o'clock in the morning and I could see that even my beautiful little battery was starting to run low. So I said, let's go to sleep. There is a cockpit in the bow where you can lie down. Just close the curtain. I'll sleep here in the cabin on the sofa. She said, no way, mate. You're too long for this sofa. Let's just lie there together. I promise to respect your honor. This was accompanied by a sly smile. I said, seriously, my hot little friend. It will be forever before I can touch another woman again. For a moment, she looked almost offended. Then she perked up and said, of course you are a big fool. I understand how difficult this is for you. I know you loved her and I know it must tear your heart apart. I am here as your friend and I want to comfort you. Just realize that you are not alone. I slept in sweatpants and a t-shirt. She wore a long t-shirt and I assumed she had panties underneath. I was lying on my back. She laid down on her side, turning away from me. She is a paradox, but wonderful. We fell asleep and surprisingly, I slept for several hours without difficulty. She did make a difference. I woke up to the sun shining through the prisms of the deck. It is a myth that love lasts forever. Love lasts only as long as the conditions that formed and nurtured it exist. One of the fundamental conditions for maintaining love is unconditional trust. And confidence in sexual exclusivity is the cornerstone of this trust. The human need to pass on one's DNA is atavistic. The woman knows who the mother is, but by the nature of their role, men cannot have such confidence. So they must believe their wife's promise to have sex with them and them only. This is the essence of the forsaking all others part of the vows. A guy can overcome a hot one-time mistake. But the idea of your wife sleeping with another man on demand, perhaps for months at a time, simply violates every aspect of the marriage covenant. Such behavior might even be understandable, but it is simply unforgivable. And as a result, my love for Janet disappeared, as if she had flipped a switch. I will regret her loss until the day I die. But I was no longer involved with her. The only problem was how to dissolve the marriage in a way that would cause maximum pain to the Senator Dushabegu. I sat in the cockpit and looked out over the Swampsock Okwana when Curry went out on deck. It was another wonderful day. I served her coffee in a heavy ceramic mug. She has a thick head of blonde hair, which she wears short. She's cuter than a basket full of kittens. That is until you really look at it. Then you see the absolute perfection of her features, the incredible size and depth of her green cat eyes. Her eyes are like those of a hentai schoolgirl, huge and seemingly innocent. But if she lets you look into them, I mean for real view in them, you will see flashes of deep feminine wisdom. I don't know how she became so wise at such a young age. I said, "Good morning, my dear little partner in crime. I hope you slept well." She smiled seductively. Curry's face is round and has apple cheeks. She looks like the archetypal head cheerleader, blonde with pale skin and two deep dimples next to a wide sensual mouth. The dimples appear every time she smiles and only add to her American dream girl look. Janet, on the other hand, has a gorgeous, exotic, dark Mediterranean beauty with the high cheekbones of a classic beauty. And Janet probably never looked naive in her life. Curry said, "I had the most amazing dream just before I woke up. Do we need to talk about this?" I replied, "Maybe later. First, I want to talk about something much more pleasant, namely about the war to the last knife with the great Senator Simpson. I need your thoughts on this." She said, "Can I see what triggered the crisis, or is it too hard for you to share? I think I can give you better advice if I have some insight into the situation." I know her terminology sounded funny, but when Curry was focused on a task, she tended to sound like a top-notch intelligence analyst. I said, "This is set up on the laptop in the cabin, but these are pretty tough things. It kills me to see this, but I know these videos present a lot of potential harm to the participants. The only question is how to use it." She left the cabin after 45 minutes. She cried. She just stood there, wringing her hands and looking at me. She said, "I'm so sorry, Paul. It must have been terrible." She then added, "I feel even more sorry for Janet." What is this? I thought that after Curry saw Janet's behavior, she would want to help me put wood on the fire. She said, "I don't know why your wife is sleeping with that idiot, but it's obvious that it's killing her. As a woman, I can testify that she is not doing this voluntarily." I said with disgust, "We watched the same video." Curry looked at me angrily and said, "Grow up." This was the first time she had ever addressed me in anything other than respectful terms. She said, "Your wife has been broken by this guy. She does what she's told even though she doesn't like it, and she clearly doesn't like him. I don't know how it happened or what power he had over her, but she was no more willing to do what I saw than a prostitute with a client. She just did it. I'm not saying this to get you two back together or even to get you to forgive her. I'm just giving you a situational report, and I'm telling you that the real villain here is her boss." I said, "Well, I agree with you on this, and I have a couple of ideas, but I'll have to get to a quiet place with stronger Wi-Fi." Did Janet believe the secret agent story? Curry laughed and said, "She bought it even though she didn't like it. She said you'll have a lot to explain when you get back. Honestly, I think she thought you were off to your pranks." I said, "So no one will be looking for me on Monday, right?" She said, "At least no one is official." I said, "I'm going to drop you off at the marina. Your car is there, right? Then you can go home today and be at work tomorrow fresh and blinking." She looked like she was about to object. I said sensibly, Curry, you have to do this. I don't want any changes in the routine, and if we both go missing, it might raise suspicions. Plus, I want you out of the blast zone. She said, I'll do it, but only because what you're saying makes sense. On the other hand, if you need me, you better call me. Otherwise, I'll find you and do terrible things to you. I dropped her off at the marina pier. She stood there, watching me swim back into the bay. She then turned and walked to her car. The last thing I saw was the sparkling hair on her head. I had a lot of time to think on my way back up the river. I could squeeze the old lady about 10 knots on diesel. So with the throttles wide open, the trip back to James Creek Marina only took about 3.5 hours. After I docked the boat properly, I crossed V Street and walked to my car. There was no one around. Of course, it was Sunday morning, so there shouldn't have been anyone there. I took South Capitol through Anacostia to 295, from there to the Beltway, across the Potomac, and on Highway 1 through Alexandria to the Hilton Alexandria Old Town where I checked in. I lived on the boat in the same clothes for almost 2 days, so my first stop was the Banana Republic clothing store on King Street, and the next stop was toiletries. After I showered, shaved, and changed into my new preppy clothes, I felt almost normal. Then I sat down at my laptop to, as my dad used to say, get to work. Revenge is a cleansing feeling. It gives you focus and direction. I no longer thought about how much pain I was in. My mind was focused on coming up with ever more ingenious ways to make the object of my hatred unhappy. I knew that, at a minimum, the video evidence would be difficult to explain to his fundamentalist constituents, as well as to his wife. But just putting it online or giving it to Gold wouldn't be personal enough. I needed to have some fun. I realized that my desire to face this guy was childish. But that bastard violated my wife and ruined my life, and I wanted him to experience the same feeling of hopelessness and emptiness that was now my new reality. So I was forced to look him in the eye as I explained his predicament. I wanted to see his horror when the trap slammed shut. I wanted to see him at that moment when he realized that there was no way out, and to watch how he would struggle with this realization. But to maximize his pain, I needed to find out everything I could about his miserable life. I'm not as good as Carrie when it comes to electronic gadgets. She grew up in that era. But I have proof that I am better than anyone else at analytical work. So I opened the personal files that we downloaded from his server. I hoped that a day spent with the senator's most intimate secrets would be educational. His server automatically backed up its clients. So while this fool religiously erased material on his computer, his office hard drive had a backup of all his personal interactions. Here's what we downloaded. And since the good senator couldn't even spell the word encryption, let alone use it, all of his criminal activity was there, readable in plain text. It didn't take long to realize that he was running a classic pay-and-play scheme worthy of Detroit City Hall. Only an overconfident, overly spoiled scumbag with no acceptance of responsibility would store evidence of actions so blatantly corrupt on a computer. But the good senator seemed to think he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. I suppose if you were sitting in the exclusive atmosphere of the Senate, you might see it this way. But it was pride, pure and simple. And as a result, the senator soon learns that you always have to pay for your actions. I am small, insignificant David, and the senatoric head probably thought he was an invincible Goliath, especially with the power and majesty of the entire federal government behind him. But the virtual world is changing the rules of the game. And in this world, the right person with the right technology can bring down anyone. By evening, I had compiled a summary for Gold so he could follow along. These revelations may actually have won him a Pulitzer Prize. The dossier contained details of names, times, services rendered, and amounts. Account numbers and access details to places where the good senator hid his loot were also provided. Along with this undeniable evidence of corruption, I also included a breathtaking high-definition video of the senator and a woman whose face was blurred out. Recording bribes was a criminal act. This evidence could ultimately send the senator to prison. But there's nothing like a hot scandal to immediately attract the attention of vultures. And the Post did not need independent confirmation to publish the graphic video I provided. I put it all on 2 flash drives and placed them in an envelope. I'll give it to gold tomorrow. But first, I really wanted to see the asshole senator squirm. Curry believed that he was the architect of Janet's downfall. So I wanted him to experience, at least for a short time, what it was like to live in emotional hell. He was constantly surrounded by personal guards and hangers-on. So I needed to lure him out of hiding. The best way to do this is to offer him a deal he couldn't refuse. I assumed that he would not want witnesses when we discussed such a politically toxic topic as his relationship with my wife. So I sent a short clip of the exciting climax of their little date, this time with Janet's face bare to his personal email address. I was pretty sure this discovery would disrupt his breakfast the next morning. And I was hoping that Janet might be the one looking at his messages. This would give me a double advantage. Of course, I didn't want to involve my friends from Fort Meade. So I sent the message using the Tor browser package. I'd jumped through enough knots that the senator's boys are trying to figure out how the Bratva got involved. To reinforce this misconception, I included a message in poor English. Sir, you are behaving very badly. We need to talk now. Please come to the National Mall on Monday at 2 a.m. Sit closer to the Lincoln Memorial. Do not bring with you the police, bad boy. I was ready to turn off the light when I felt the urge to call Carrie. I wanted to hear her voice. The phone kept ringing and I was ready to hang up when she answered. She sounded out of breath. I said, "Oh my God, did I bother you?" She replied, "It's okay. I'm glad you called." "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm really sorry I called so late. But can we meet tomorrow at 11 as in at the King Street subway station in Alexandria? I'll tell you about some new developments. Now go back to who or what you were doing." She laughed and said, "He's worth the wait." I laughed when I hung up. I thought, what a woman. I fell asleep feeling better. I was going to destroy this bastard. But first I was going to watch him squirm. Janet was also expecting the same kind of bad news. And for some reason, this made me sad. Her betrayal created two realities for me. I wanted to punish her. But I also had all the residual feelings of a loving connection that we had accumulated over the past 10 years. These memories are tucked neatly into another part of my psyche, relatively untouched by my current pain. I was pretty sure Janet never meant to hurt me. But that didn't change the fact that I was left alone and destitute thanks to her actions. Tomorrow I was going to settle my score with the shitty senator. And that kept me going. I knew that once this was done and my divorce from Janet was settled, and it would certainly be painful, I was in for a pretty desolate life. I was waiting for Carrie at the subway exit. I tried to convince myself that I needed her help. But I couldn't fool myself. I just needed her. She became much more than my partner in crime and comrade in combat. She was a security blanket, the only person I knew I could trust and rely on. She got off the Blue Line train at exactly 11 o'clock. I stood on the other side of the turnstiles as she passed, looking around for me. She was wearing her usual skinny jeans and heels. But instead of a t-shirt, she was wearing a V-neck sweater that revealed quite a bit of her cleavage, making her look older by a change. She looked worried. Then, when she saw me, her face lit up, and she quickly walked towards me, jumping up and down as she went. She seemed calm, collected, intelligent, and in complete control of the situation. I said, "I'm really sorry that I interrupted your fun last night. I should have been more mindful of timing. I just started taking action, and I need your help. I know I told you to stay away, but I can't do this alone." She said cheerfully, "It was just a little sporty sex." "How are things going with the senator operation?" I said. She said flirtatiously, "You are my boss." "May I?" I said, "Call and say you're tracking something and we'll be at work tomorrow. I don't want my disappearance to be connected in any way with yours." She said, "Got it," and called. We crossed Diagonal Road next to the station and went into Joe Theismann. Lunchtime was just starting, so we immediately got a table. I told her what I had discovered. She said, I said, "It's obvious to someone of your generation. But remember that this guy is old and not the wittiest. Plus, he's not afraid of evil because he's the evilest bastard in the valley. She smiled. Her face is infectious. I had to remind myself that Carrie was taboo, at least until I sorted out my marriage. It wasn't because of her smoking hot body or that face. She was just a complete package of tough, smart femininity. She made me feel confident. She said, I said, only he doesn't know who he will meet. I just want to look him in the eye when I tell him everything that's going to happen to him. But I need someone to watch my back while I do it. I have no idea what he plans to do with what I sent him. But he can bring friends. And that's why I need someone to watch my back and warn me if there's trouble. We spent the rest of the lunch hour carefully planning our plan and then went our separate ways. I didn't want to risk putting her in danger. The senator arrived at 2:05 p.m. and sat on a decorative wall next to the reflecting pool on the side of the Lincoln Memorial. He looked very uneasy. In fact, he looked scared great. I thought I'd let it sit for a bit. Carrie sat with her back to the marble baluster on the second set of steps to the memorial. She set up the camera on a tripod in front of her. She took photographs of the National Mall through a 300mm lens. But she was actually using a telephoto lens to scan for problems. There was an open connection between my mobile phone, which was in my shirt pocket, and hers. She should have warned me if she noticed something. He sat on the part of the wall facing down the reflecting pool towards the Capitol. There were a few tourists in the area, but no one was close enough to overhear. I was standing on the grass behind him when I said, "Good afternoon, Senator Simpson. May I join you?" He turned around as if he was in the desert and had just heard the rustling of a snake behind him. I stood there, trying to look neutral, not angry, not happy. I deliberately positioned myself so that he would have to hold an awkward position in order to look at me. This was planned. I could see that he recognized me, but could not remember who I was. I just stared at him for another minute. Finally, I could see recognition light up in his eyes. He said, "You're Janet Schmidt's husband." I walked around the edge of the wall and sat down next to him. I said, "Bingo, the one." I could see the fear in his eyes. He was afraid that I was going to physically hurt him. Well, I didn't mean to. What I had planned would be a much more lasting and satisfying torment than a quick hit. Politics is all about image, and thanks to me, his journey from the penthouse to the outdoor toilet will be via an express elevator. I said, "Yes, I really am Janet's husband, and I'd like to tell you about the situation you're in. I have a lot more graphic material than the clip I sent you. It's clearly you, so you can't deny it, and it's not something you want to see on YouTube." He said angrily, "How did you get these shots?" I replied, "It's none of your business. You care what I'm going to do with them." He looked at me appraisingly and said, "How much?" The guy was a really nasty piece of shit. He thought I rented Janet out to shake him into ransom. It almost caused him to get punched in the mouth. But I needed to stay calm. He was doomed. I just had to finish telling him about it. I said, "Here's what's going to happen. First, I'm going to give it all to the Post guy who's investigating you for his story about moral depravity in the Senate. Then he's going to publish it. And at the same time, I will create a website called Sellators Are Out of Control. I've been recording you for a while now, so it will contain the content you've already seen, plus much more. I'm sure it will attract millions of visitors. Maybe this will go viral, and I'll make a ton of money." He looked horrified. He muttered, "But you can't do that. Think about what it will do to the country. Think about my constituents." I laughed out loud. I said, "I'm thinking about the country and your constituents. They might want to know what the voice of family values is doing in Washington. I'm also sure your distinguished colleagues in the Senate will want to know what you've been up to. This whole body is like a pack of hyenas. They would tear a wounded member of the pack to pieces." He absorbed it all. There was a pause while the implications began to sink in. Then he buried his face in his hands and began to sob. It was an amazing surprise. He was an even bigger coward than I thought. But watching his public collapse was satisfying. It mirrored the personal collapse I experienced when I learned of my own situation. I said mockingly, "Cheer up, you pathetic coward. You're crying just like my wife does after sex with you." And about Janet. If you tell her about this before I have the pleasure of doing it myself, I'll come up with a few things you won't like at all. Then I smiled at him indulgently and said, "But unlike you, I am a decent person. So I will allow you to resign from your position to spend more time with your family. If you do this within the next 24 hours, I will not hand it over to you. Fast." He looked at me hopefully and said, "Will you let me do this?" It would have saved a lot of his reputation at home if he had retired in good standing than as the exposed scoundrel he truly was. I said, "Like I said, I'm a decent person." I had absolutely no intention of doing anything other than exposing his vile, immoral qualities for all to see. But it would give our conversation a lot more weight when he knew that I was as cunning as he was. He stood up, took my hand in both of his in that classic political gesture, and shook it with grateful appreciation. He even said with tears in his eyes, "Thank you." Then he turned and walked along the reflecting pool. He was defeated but not yet resigned. The next 24 hours will change this state significantly for him. I called Gold and asked him to meet me at Madison for an afternoon cocktail. It's right down the street from the Post. Carrie was sitting in a booth with me at the bar when he walked in. I stood up and we shook hands. I said, "Do you remember my assistant Carrie Whitman?" He gave her the same appraising look that every man gave and said, "Of course I remember." At least he was honest. I handed him the envelope and outlined what was on the 2 flash drives. I said, "I have to apologize to you. My wife did have an affair with Senator Simpson. All the evidence is on this flash drive." And handed him the first one. Last night, I put together a 15-minute compilation of Janet's best moments. It was devastating for me to relive this. But I wanted to control what Gold saw. However, even 15 minutes of what I conveyed to Gold was enough to end the senator's career. Then I picked up another flash drive. I said, "This flash drive contains all the documentation about the multi-million-dollar corruption scheme that the senator has been running since he took over the presidency. The details are here. Even by Washington standards, this is corruption. It was stolen from his hard drive, so you will need to confirm this from other sources. But the paths you need to follow, investigators, and the holes worth looking into are all clearly marked. I'm confident the Post has the resources to deal with this quickly." Gold looked at me in surprise. He said, "If what you say is true, this will be the political news of the year. And the senator is doomed. I won't ask how you got it, but I can congratulate you. This is explosive stuff." I said, "The information I just gave you was collected by Carrie. She's the genius behind it all." He said, "What can I do for you?" I said, "First of all, you can try to keep Janet out of this as much as possible. She's a victim, and I want to protect her." Gold said, "Even though she deceived you?" I responded, "I want to be fair. She ripped my heart out of my chest. But this is personal. When you release this information, there will be chaos that I can't even imagine happening on Capitol Hill. She doesn't deserve to suffer through this. Consequences, she may have cheated, and that's bad enough. But she's not a criminal." We shook hands and Gold left. Carrie looked at me in amazement and said, "That was really noble of you. What's next?" I sighed and said, "Now I'm going home to face the music." She looked worried and asked, "You need something from me? Is there anything I can do for you?" I replied, "This is a battle I need to fight alone. I assume this will all unfold over the next 24 hours. Maybe I'll see you at work the day after tomorrow." Carrie said in a strange voice, "She will expect you to sleep with her." "Are you going to do that?" I pretended to cough and said, "Dengue, or maybe it's Ebola. Either way, I'm too sick to touch it. By tomorrow, none of this will matter." We shook hands and parted. I stood and watched her go until she was out of sight around the bend, leaving behind only sparkling hair. On my way back up the river, I had a lot of time to think. I could squeeze the old girl about 10 knots on the diesels. So with the throttles wide open, the trip back to James Creek Marina only took about 3.5 hours. After I docked the boat properly, I crossed V Street and walked to my car. When we parted, Carrie stood on her tiptoes and kissed me on the cheek. This time she looked completely unhappy. She said, "Be brave, boss. I'll always be here if you need me. Call anytime." I looked at her beautiful, sad, and worried face and said, "You will be the first person I call, and I will never forget what you did for me." When I returned home, Janet was gone. I changed into my most comfortable clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, and did some work. Then I sat down to wait for her in the office. I had already prepared the video file on the laptop in front of me. She arrived around 7 p.m. with Chinese food from kitchen number 1. She put her bag on the table in the hallway and immediately went upstairs. 15 minutes later, she returned wearing her standard loungewear, yoga pants, and a loose sweatshirt. She took her bag and headed to the kitchen, looking thoughtful. Seeing me in the office, she shuddered and absolute joy spread across her face. She dropped her bag and ran towards me. I woke up. She hugged me and kissed me. I didn't say anything until this moment. I was full of emotions. She stepped back and said, "Thank God you're home. I was so worried. Where have you been?" I said, "Sit down," and pointed to a plump leather chair by my desk. Then I said those 4 fateful words, "We need to talk." She looked puzzled and worried. She sat down. God, how beautiful she was. I said, "First of all, I want to say that I love you more than my life. I've never loved anyone but you, and I probably never will. But I know." She looked like she was about to say, "You know what?" But then it dawned on her. Her face turned pale. She sobbed and said in a choked voice, "Oh, God, no." Then she collapsed back into her chair. She put her right hand over her eyes. Unfortunately, it was the same gesture she used on Friday. But this time she seemed to be catatonic. I said, "I'm going to leave a very violent video here on the laptop. I want you to look at it. When you're done, we can talk." Then I stood up and pressed play. She screamed as if I had hit her. I left the room to the sound of her sobs. I picked up the fallen bag of Chinese food and went to the kitchen. I put the bag in the refrigerator. I thought neither of us would feel like eating tonight. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared into space. I was completely disconnected from reality and time. Finally, she appeared at the door. She walked very hard, crying, covering his face with his hands. She stumbled on her way to where I was sitting and sat down across from me. She put her head in her hands and cried for a couple more minutes. I finally said, "Janet, we need to talk." And now she slowly raised her head and looked at me. Even with all the tears, her face, stained with tears, was beautiful. I said, "I made a vow not to ask why. And you don't have to tell me how sorry you are. I just want to talk about how we're going to separate." She sobbed. "No, you can't do that." This was starting to really irritate me. I'm tired of people telling me what I can't do, especially cheaters. She cried. "I love you, Paul, only you. I hated to betray you, but I couldn't stop. He's so powerful. He just wouldn't let me go." I said, "I don't even know what that means. You're human. All you had to do was say no and walk away. Instead, you gave him sex on demand. And by this time tomorrow, he won't be so powerful anymore." She looked shocked. She said, "What have you done?" I said, "The Post is about to publish an article about your affair tomorrow. It will be very well illustrated, if you know what I mean. Your boy lover will end up on the street. He will be forced to resign and ride off into the sunset with his loving wife. Unless, of course, she kicks him out for what he did. Don't be afraid. Post will try to maintain your anonymity if possible." She lost all her complexion. She said, "It will ruin him." I said, "I sure hope so. Why should you even care? Do you love him that much?" She said with some heat, "He is my boss. He put me in the position I am in now. I don't love him. I don't even hate him. I only love you. I said, okay, I'm naive, although I promised myself. If you don't love him, then please explain why you slept with him. And if you say that it was just for sex, I will leave right now without further ado. She collected her thoughts and said, I tried to help him cope with the pressure of his position. He is a very important and influential person. His leadership and guidance affects everyone in the country, and I thought I was making a difference by supporting him. He came into my office a couple of months after I started working for him and said he didn't want to live anymore. He said the burden of decisions was too great for him and that he couldn't stand it anymore. We were alone in the office, and I was scared. So I just sat on the couch with him and held him while he cried on my chest. She said, he told me that his wife is a bitch and cold. Their marriage is a sham, not like ours, where we love and support each other, and that he needs my support and a light in the darkness. I thought, oh my god, has this line ever worked for anyone other than overly horny or deathly stupid women? I just did it because I felt sorry for him. So that's what it's all about. She was seduced by power. It was such an ancient trick that even Caligula may have used it. This scoundrel twisted Janet's maternal instincts into permission for himself to take advantage of her, Janet added. After that, he sometimes came to me for temporary relief. Then he started taking me to social events instead of his wife. We even had dinner with the president a couple of times. It was incredibly exciting to be so close to absolute power, of course. After that, we had sex. I was just absorbed in it all. What she had just told me was a perfect example of pure, unadulterated, self-confident female egoism with the addition of narcissistic delusion. She liked that she had famous and important men who lusted after her, even the old lecher who lived at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. She was still saying, my relationship with him made me feel unbearably guilty at first. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't want you to suffer. I knew you wouldn't understand the importance of what I did. We moved in such different circles. I knew you would never know. And when I was with him, we were surrounded by so many people that I never thought you would know. So I put my guilty feelings in a box and left them there. I acted exactly the same way I always acted with you. You weren't hurt at all, and I tried to make you feel good. I thought to myself, great job on compartmentalization, you schizoid traitor. She gushed, it wasn't like I love you at all. It was like I was a different woman when I was with him. It was naughty, and the power was intoxicating. Sex was just part of my job. It definitely expanded my ego, though, to know that such a powerful man needed me so much I was making a difference for the whole country. Yes, monumental egoism, delusions of grandeur and illicit sex, that was the Washington 3. That was all I needed to walk out the door with no regrets. I seriously didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That was the dumbest excuse I've ever heard. She had no respect for me or our marriage, so she tried to justify her behavior by wrapping it in a flag. Or did she really believe that I was that big of a fool? She finished saying, but then he started treating me like a piece of meat, and that's what I hated. I hated him. I thought to myself, who is this woman? This was definitely not the sensible woman I once loved. I said bitterly, congratulations, you are now an experienced congressional woman of easy virtue, and besides, you are dazzlingly beautiful, so all you have to do is spread the word, and I'm sure you'll find another powerful sugar daddy to hire you. She screamed and said, how can you say that? You are my only love, and I know you love me. We have to put everything else aside and focus on saving our marriage. I may have gone a little overboard, but it was a special situation. I promise you, I will never make that mistake again. I'm so sorry, and I'll dedicate the rest of my life to making up for it. Cliché upon cliché, I said, the only thing we need to focus on is dividing up the marital property. You're crazy if you think we have a chance of going back to the way things were. I'm filing for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, not adultery, but don't challenge that, or the whole world will see a lot of you on the internet. My lawyer will contact you. Please communicate with me through him from now on. I never want to talk to you again. She screamed in pain. These were my words of pain. At this, I stood up and resolutely walked towards the door. I picked up the sea bag that I had previously placed next to her. I packed enough to live on the boat for a while. I turned around to look at her one last time. She didn't look at me. She cried loudly, dropping her head into her hands. I didn't regret my decision, but I was desperately grieving the loss of my happy life and the woman I loved. Now I was completely alone like a cat in the rain. I walked slowly down the brick path and threw my large bag into the back of the Range Rover. I don't know how other men would have reacted to what happened, but I felt exhausted and completely devoid of emotion. I would have been furious if it weren't for the satisfaction that I had completely ruined the life of the person who put me in this position. I should have hated Janet, but she was the love of most of my life. We've been through too many good things together for me to despise her. I just felt a sad sense of loss, emptiness, and betrayal. It seemed to me that I shouldn't expect a better attitude from life. I planned to stay on the boat. I had everything I needed for temporary living, and it would allow me to do all the urgent things needed to resolve the end of my marriage. I haven't called my lawyer yet or thought about a new place to live. I was too busy to prepare the ground for Senator Scoundrel, but I will do all this tomorrow. I actually Khalid scored while driving down Maine toward Fort McNair. He was interested in the fact that Janet had been to intimate dinners at the White House. He said he was going to dig deeper into this information. He hinted that he thought Janet's affair might ruin the whole picture. I said, "Do you really think she slept with the president?" He replied, "I'm sure he'd take advantage of her if she was available and in the right place. That old lecher would sleep with anyone. And Simpson is definitely sycophantic enough to make her available, plus she's incredibly hot." Are you saying she was in the White House twice? I'd bet that after the second visit they changed the linens in the Lincoln bedroom. Maybe I'll dig into the visitor lists to see what I can find there. I didn't know what to think about being in the same hole as the most powerful man in the free world. I was stowing my things below deck when a thunderstorm began, which threatened throughout the day. It became a strong weight in the wind and waves rocked the boat on the moorings. It wasn't cruel. It was actually quite soothing to listen to the rain pattering on the deck above me. I opened a bottle of Beaumont 27, turned on Beethoven's Immortal Ninth Symphony and sat down to meditate while drinking whiskey. I knew this was my last conversation with Janet and I struggled with the idea that I would probably spend the rest of my life alone. I knew I could never trust a woman again, at least not enough to let her into my life. It was all too painful and I didn't want to repeat this experience. I could understand the context. Janet fell into the trap of power and loved being there. Politicians come and go, but employees like Janet live in a Darwinian culture and it was natural for her to gravitate towards the one who had the most influence. Janet is beautiful and Simpson wanted her, so he used his position to win her case closed. Janet gained short-term fame and the sense of self-respect you get when you move in circles of true power. This would have been a smart choice if she weren't married, but with the departure of the senator and my departure, she now has nothing left. Janet has already called several times. I didn't want to hear any more excuses. I'll delete her voicemails later. The phone rang again as I was finishing up a lovely 2 fingers of peat nectar. This time it was Carrie. I looked at my watch. It was 12:30 at night. I said, "What's up, baby?" She said, "God, Paul, are you okay?" Janet just called me in complete despair. She said you left her and she doesn't understand why. Is she smoking something weird or is she still not? Did you see the video? I laughed and said, she thinks a 5-month scam with the US senator is no big deal. She said she just slept with him for the sake of the country. She doesn't understand why I feel so bad about it. Carrie burst out laughing on the other end of the line. I added, so I'll live on the boat until I find a place. Thunder rumbled. I added, she's tied to the pier, so I won't need any lifeboats. She laughed and said, how are you feeling? Do you want me to come? I laughed and replied, sleeping conditions will be the same as Saturday night, so I don't think it's worth it yet. I'm starting to feel a little better and don't want to complicate things just yet. One thing is still bothering me. After listening to all this nonsense from Janet, I'm starting to wonder if I was married to a fictional woman. The one I spoke to today has no moral compass. Carrie said, "This is what happens when women grow up projecting an image that is based on the morals that society imposes on us. This is what we internalize and reflect. It's our way of ensuring approval. This identity is unreal by definition because it is based on the views of other people. However, for most women, this determines how we live. That is, until temptation gets in our way. Then a sexual woman finds it difficult to say no to her lower instincts. You have to really understand the consequences to be able to refuse something as tempting as illicit sex. And it seems Janet has not yet realized her inner state." "Janet loves sex, doesn't she?" I said, "Definitely." Carrie said, "That's it, I'm not saying she's schizophrenic. I'm just saying that the woman you were talking to is an evolved version of the Janet you once knew. She still sees herself as your loving wife. It's just that she's made this new discovery. That sex outside of marriage can be fun and satisfying. The Janet you fell in love with is probably still here, just as she was before. But the new Janet who learned she could use her body to control powerful men will continue to justify her promiscuous behavior. It's like she had an evil sister. And this sister will continue to do wild and self-destructive things until the original Janet learns to channel her natural sexual impulses into more constructive channels in life." I said, "Ugh, this is very serious. How did you become so wise?" She laughed bitterly and said, "From my own bitter experience. And I went through this twice. I had to kill my evil sister to regain some self-respect." I said, "Thank you for telling me that. At least now I can sleep better knowing that the woman I talked to tonight wasn't always like this. Now it's been a long day. So I'll talk with you tomorrow." I fell asleep while the boat was still rocking on the waves. As I fell asleep, I decided not to deceive myself any longer. Carrie Whitman was one hell of a good woman. And although I swore I would never deal with women again, I couldn't help but wonder what life could be like with someone as strong, smart, and insightful as Carrie. The next day, the Post came out with a story on the front page of its online edition under the loud headline, "Senator Simpson." CNN and all the national media also picked up the news. Gold kept his word and did not mention Janet specifically. But that didn't stop the media monster truck from rummaging around like a pig for truffles. In the end, Janet's name came out anyway. By this morning's episode, her face was plastered all over the national news, which of course drew me the horns in a spectacular manner. Media jackals found out where Janet lives. So she left our condominium, pursued by a crowd of reporters and paparazzi. I watched the commotion on the local news channel. It was heartbreaking to see the person you once loved look so completely defeated. I knew that they would follow me further. So I took off the mooring lines and headed for the mouth of the Potomac. It was a full day's journey, but by evening I was sheltered in a deep bay off Cape Lookout. My mysterious disappearance and my intelligence background sparked a storm of speculation that lasted the standard 15 minutes of media attention. Dick had protested all day, claiming that the infidelity rumors were lies made up by a jealous husband. So I used my entire data package to upload unedited video of his adventures to selected sites. I then sent the URLs to TMZ. The global interest it generated almost broke the internet. Given the rumors that were going around town about the president's involvement with Simpson's mistress, I'm sure the White House would have him removed if they could get away with it. Instead, our noble leader contented himself with throwing Simpson under the bus and then running over him several more times. The president's scathing statement about Simpson's morals and ethics was textbook Washington hypocrisy. Amazingly, all this happened within 36 hours. Gold then broke the news. Thanks to what I gave him, it was easy for Post researchers to follow the vile trail to Simpson's hidden treasure. So the evening edition came out with a long and detailed article about corruption and nepotism in Washington behind the scenes, authored by Gold. I thought, I smell Pulitzer. There is nothing like the hint of a scandal to get all the politicians to come together. His friends in the Senate forced Simpson to resign by early the next morning. The former dickhead senator then found himself indicted by the Attorney General for racketeering and bribery. His wife returned home to Dad, who owned most of the valuable parts of this damn state. The application of the marriage contract was inevitable. But the dad also hinted in his Today Show interview that he was looking for ways to make quartering back legal at home. I really like it when a plan works. I made the necessary phone calls while exposing the exploits of my soon-to-be ex-wife to every idiot on the World Wide Web. I always had a college colleague as my personal legal advisor. Given what we do, legal advice is an integral part of the private intelligence business. I didn't need to explain the context. With 24-hour media attention, not knowing about my situation would have required living under a rock. He asked me what happened. I said, she drank that brand of cooler they serve on the hill. That was enough, everything was said. He said, don't worry about anything, Paul. I won't ask where you are. I imagine you're hiding from the press. I replied, they will never find me. Jim continued, I already have your power of attorney and I will arrange all the necessary legal and financial procedures. Tomorrow evening, I will issue a summons to her. It will be fair. I know that you want everything to be fair. I added with great sincerity, it's really sad, you know. I guess I still love her. He made sympathetic sounds and hung up. Janet hasn't called for a while. I guess she had her own worries. I wondered if she and former Senator Dickface were facing the wolves together. That was a comforting thought. My phone lit up around 7 a.m. the next day. I was still sleeping. It was Carrie. She said, I imagine you're hiding somewhere. Do you want some company? I understand. After all the offers and refusals, I understood what she meant. I thought for a few moments. This woman has been an important part of my work life for a long time. In fact, I've probably had more face-to-face interactions with her than I have with Janet in the last almost 4 years. She was my only friend and companion in my recent troubles. She had feminine wisdom, infinite in its scope and depth. And she was incredibly attractive. And she was clearly in love with me. The question was whether I was ready to open a new relationship with a woman before the dust settled from the destruction of the old one. I had the necessary face-to-face confrontation with Janet. And any possibility of reconciliation was destroyed by my national fame as her careless husband. So in my mind, the past was dead and the road ahead was wide open. But the question was whether I wanted to throw myself into the fire with a woman who could break my heart like Carrie. If I invited her on board, I knew we'd have sex. And I wasn't sure I was ready for the consequences of that. But for all the Hamlet-like hesitation I felt, there was one thing I was absolutely sure of. I really need and want Carrie by my side. So after an uncomfortably long pause, I said, you can come, but it will probably be the end of both of our careers. I'm leaving this nest of vice. Do you still want to come with me? She answered without a second of hesitation. Where should I meet you? I met her at the marina in Redville, just over the Virginia border. She parked her car in the area where the boats are stored. I gave them $1.200 to make sure she would remain there untouched until I could find someone to come get her. I called my boss, who owned the company, and told him that given the media storm, I couldn't be effective. I told him that Carrie was with me and that she had not made any decisions yet. Carrie wore her classic outfit, a t-shirt, skinny jeans, and boat boots. She had a medium-sized bag that contained the rest of her belongings. She was beaming with happiness as we set off for the Chesapeake Bay and headed south. I said, do you want to raise the sail? She replied, of course, if I'm going to be your sailor, I need to learn everything. So I showed her the motorized winch and then hoisted the sail myself while she steered. The weather was perfect for sailing, as is often the case in the fall in the Chesapeake. Just as the sail filled and flapped, the boat heeled to starboard and I returned to the controls while she sat next to me. We looked at the water in silence for a couple of minutes. Then she said, what does that mean, Paul? I didn't ask what she was talking about. I said, I'd have to be an idiot to get burned as badly as I did, and then turn around and get involved with someone even hotter, especially someone 10 years younger. But it feels so right. And I think you feel the same way. As long as we are honest with each other and always discuss everything, I think this will work for a while. And I'm willing to take the risk, although when I think about it, it seems like the stupidest thing I could do. She looked at me with her huge cat eyes and said, "Nothing good comes without effort, and maintaining a healthy relationship is the hardest part of it all. The only thing I promise you is that I won't give up on you." She smiled at me with her dimples and said, "I've been through a lot more of these things than you or Janet, and I know the pitfalls. I know you've been hurt by someone you trusted. I would never do that to you, but I cannot prove this except over time. At the same time, I want it to be as stress-free as possible. It's a very brave move for you to start something new with me, and I feel the weight of that responsibility. You will never regret it." We spent the first night in Mob Jack Bay, away from the shipping lanes at the mouth of the James River. I made a small dinner of rice and crab meat with a light Old Bay seasoning. Carrie drinks beer, not wine, and we wash it all down with a cold Ewingling while watching the sun go down. She is tiny, but perfectly built and proportioned. I raised the awning to protect us from the wind, and the lights on the water were magical. She seemed to be thinking intently. It was like she was trying to merge her consciousness with mine. Then a small voice said, "Does this seem as unreal to you as it does to me? 2 weeks ago, we just kicked gold out of your office, and you were happily married." I thought about it. It was as if the incredible power of emotion expended during that period, combined with the thrill of revenge, created a rift in spacetime, and every aspect of what I knew as reality was turned upside down. Now it seemed as if Carrie had always been here, in my arms. And my 10-year marriage to Janet was something that happened to another person. This wasn't some fake time travel story I made up in my head to justify my joyful ride into the sunset. It was as if the universe was rearranging itself, that what was originally supposed to happen could happen. I loved Janet unconditionally. I never even looked at other women, and I wouldn't be here if conditions didn't dictate it. But it seemed that fate demanded this specific permission. I had no doubt that the fiery and unwavering woman I held in my arms was the right person, a feeling I could not ignore. Carrie has always been there for me from the first day she showed up at work, looking the smartest and most eager to fight girls in the whole class. But until now, I've been judging her falling silent sexuality only as a spectator. And she never gave me the slightest hint that there could be anything more between us than the relationship of two close work friends. I never had romantic feelings for her. She was a partner and colleague. I began to see Carrie in a new light, one that made me see the woman she truly was. I had to understand what in her past made her so wise. I was afraid that I wouldn't like the story, but I needed to hear her. I was beginning to think that this was more than just a hobby, something that had become a convenient cure for my marital woes. If that wasn't the case, then I needed to know who I was dealing with. I pulled her towards me, and we kissed for the first time. Then we made love. She said, "I didn't expect this." With these words, she stood up and began to collect her clothes. I just sat there, still stunned. As she dressed, she said in an uncertain voice, "Now you know my big secret." I said, "I don't know what you're talking about. My brain is still too dazed to think properly." She replied sarcastically, "I thought you might have noticed that I have this wild sexual side. It's more animal than human. I've suffered from this since puberty. I was raised Catholic, so I spent the years after these things started growing." She pointed to her breasts, on my knees, praying to be freed from the curse of my sexuality. But it didn't help me at all. Thanks to the church, I barely made it to my 18th birthday. But once I did, I needed sex at least once a day. Otherwise, I became very irritable. I divorced 2 marriages. The first time I was ashamed. They had children. The second time I didn't care. The guy ran away after his wife caught us. So I had to face motherhood on my own. And I was the only one very scared. My future changed when I was unable to keep my pregnancy safe in the first trimester. I returned to the single female life. But I did 3 months of introspection. And I thought very seriously about where my life was heading. I came to the conclusion that unless I learned to control my sexual urges, I would be on a very slippery slope. Unlike most women my age, I have already walked all the dark roads that exist. and I knew what awaited at the end of each of them. So I started working on ways to control my body. And my self-esteem also grew a little. And then I met you. You changed everything for me. That was an amazing statement. She said, I loved you from the day I first saw you. At times my love for you was almost all-consuming. But you are an honest and moral man. And you were married to a woman who was still superior to me in every way I could not have hoped for. As a result, our relationship never touched on any aspect of my sexuality. I knew you loved Janet. And that Janet loved you as much as I loved you. I just wanted to live my life to make you proud of me. And if I was lucky, I hoped that I could spend my whole life next to you. It never occurred to me that Janet would end up in the same situation. Everything changed the moment Janet lost her way. I knew you would never accept her betrayal. And this was an opportunity for me to show you that I can be the woman you deserve. Now that you know how crazy I am and how completely out of control I am, all I can say is that I would dedicate every iota of this crazy passion to you and only you, the man I love, if you give me the chance. I looked at her gorgeous little face. She almost begged me. I wondered how I could have been so lucky. I knew a couple of things. First of all, my marriage is over. So in my head, there were no moral restrictions in relations with Curry. Second, I knew it was a long road from where we were to marriage vows. And we'll have plenty of time to find out. Let's work together whether we are together or not. I said with confidence, your sexuality and your sexual history mean nothing to me. All I care about is the person standing here. And for almost 4 years, you have been my absolutely reliable, loyal, unwavering, and caring friend and companion. The fact that you're the wildest lover in the world is just icing on the cake as long as you're only like that with me. She hit me on the shoulder from her 2 dimples and her sunny smile. I knew she was ready to be the best lover and companion a man could ever want. So I said, okay, then let's go to the Bahamas and wait for the divorce. I need a place in the sun to get out of the rain. She looked puzzled. She didn't understand the illusion. But since it was an old life, she really didn't need to. Now she was my son. Janet fought tooth and nail for the divorce. Her story turned into a tale of how cruelly I abandoned her words because she was sexually harassed again. Her words. This continued in the press until Gold released another big headline. It turns out that Janet didn't just sleep with Simpson. She slept with the president in the White House. And it was he with whom she spent her last night at Watergate. This news changed the whole story. Suddenly she was in the same league as Donna Rice, Chandra Levy, Real Hunter, and Monica Lewinsky. And the leader of the free world was fighting for his political life and legacy. It is not surprising that after this news, the divorce went smoothly and without further ado. I heard that Janet is writing a book about her life as the president's lover and that she is also doing interviews. Janet now had a celebrity to sell her soul for. Part of me wanted to see her end up living in a cardboard box under a bridge. But I have accepted the fact that in real life, bad people often do not suffer for their actions. This is how the world works, contrary to everything they say in fairy tales. On the other hand, Dad stripped Simpson of every penny he had and then threw him out without a friend in the world. This bastard got what he deserved. So the scales of justice are balanced to some extent. Meanwhile, my exquisite little lover and best friend became the highlight of the program in Freeport. After a week of sailing, we found ourselves in the Port Luquia Marina. We lived on the boat, hung out at the market and swam at Luquia Beach. Every day it seemed like half the male population was waiting for Carrie to show up. She let her blonde hair grow out and it contrasted with her beautiful tan body, which at that moment looked like a small golden idol. And she wasn't kidding about her sexuality. The 5 months we spent on the Grand Bahama Island awaiting our divorce were more intense than my basic military training. The initial uncertainty of our relationship deepened into absolute and deep love. I even loved it when we went to clubs and all the Bahamian hotties would line up to dance with her. She danced like a wild woman, but all the time she made it clear that the perfect body belongs to me. And I felt waves of envy washing over this place. One evening in mid-March, we were sitting at a table by the ocean at the Coral Reef Bar. It was another perfect Bahamian evening. The sunset painted the tropical sky in reds, oranges, and purples. She looked at me with those mysterious green cat eyes of hers. Her shining blonde hair, her perfect golden skin, and white dress complemented her perfectly. Her amazing beauty. I think I've never seen anyone so beautiful. She reached across the table to take my hand in her small paws. She did this often. I said, "I have a question for you." She replied, "Of course." But she didn't let go of my hand. I said, "You'll have to let go of my hand so I can do this." She looked annoyed. I stood up, walked around the table, and knelt down next to her. She realized what was happening and began to cry. I took out the ring and said, "Carrie Whitman, you would do me the honor of becoming my wife." She cried on my shoulder and said, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes," and dissolved in happy tears. People around us applauded. We got married at Mary Star of the Sea Church. She was in white and I was in my best guayabera. We returned next week. We both needed to find gainful employment, but were both tired of commercial intelligence. So we opened a boutique, serving some of our former clients. We made a lot of money doing this. But the main thing was that we always worked together. Janet and I had different careers, and ultimately, this division led to death. Carrie and I shared everything and always focused only on each other. If we were not perfectly suited for each other, this degree of closeness would inevitably lead to friction. But the more we worked together, the closer we became to each other. One Saturday morning, Carrie walked in from a mysterious visit. She came today where I worked. She said anxiously, "Paul, we need to talk." I thought, oh God, this is serious. I followed her onto the deck. We lived in McLean and had a big, beautiful backyard. We sat in our usual chairs, looking out at the flower beds. She said, "I just went to the doctor and he confirmed what I need to tell you." I thought, damn, that's capital C. She looked even more worried and said, "I haven't used protection for the last few months because I wanted your baby. I was going to discuss this with you before things got too far, but it looks like it already has. I'm 2 months pregnant. We're going to be parents. I know we promised to always discuss such important things, but I didn't think it would happen so quickly." She looked at me uncertainly as if I could kick her out for daring to get pregnant from me. I remembered how her last pregnancy went and knew I had to be gentle. I took her hand and said, "I didn't think you could make me any happier, but you just did." Her face lit up as if all the care in the world had disappeared. She showed me her full dimples and said, "I love you. I will always love you. And now we will have another person who will love you." I said, "Carrie, it seems like fate that I went from the worst time in my life to the best with you. But that's what happened and it's all because of who you are. I'll love you more than you love me because you gave my life a meaning that I could never have dreamed of. Now let's start buying things for the nursery. I have a daughter to spoil." She said, "What if it's a boy?" I replied, "A woman like you couldn't give birth to anything less than an exceptional baby girl for the first time." And I was right. Small Liz Schmidt looked exactly like her mother. Carrie threw herself into motherhood with the same passion she had for our sex life. She showed equal devotion to all 4 of our children. It was a wonderful life. I was sitting on the hospital bed when they all arrived. Carrie was now in her 70s, but in my opinion, she was as beautiful as ever. I knew I had very little time left, but it was a life well lived thanks to my special angel. I took her hand in mine. She smiled her dimpled smile. I whispered, "I love you." She squeezed my hand, too out of breath to speak. While she was doing this, the room turned into one point of blinding light. All I could hear as I slipped away was my family's sobs. I wasn't the least bit scared. I knew I would see her on the other side. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one,